Well, good morning, everybody. Hello, I hope everybody is there. I can see 50 people. I hopefully, or 51 people now. So maybe there might be a couple of people who drop in a little bit later on. But really, good morning to you all. My name is Greta Westwood, and I'm the Chief Exec of the Florence Nightingale Foundation. And it's my absolute pleasure to invite you and say welcome to you this morning to the first webinar for you, and that's challenging in today. So a special thank you to Gemma Stacey and her team for organising this webinar, for Jess Reed and Jackie Dunkley Bent for funding this programme, and to all of you who spared this time this morning to come on this webinar, particularly as the NHS is suffering everything that we know about at the moment. So really lovely to see. I can't see you. Well, when I use the word see, it means that I can see you, because I can see there are now 54 people. So what a fantastic year this has been for the leadership of nurses and midwives, and what exemplars that you have shown as leaders in midwifery. What a year it's been for you, for midwifery, and for the women that you look after, the things that you've needed to change to make sure that midwifery care is delivered safe and sound. And importantly, how you manage the partner in the midwifery space. So at the appointments, at the birth, and then postnatally. So it's been a year of innovation, and I absolutely know that you as midwives have been at the forefront of developing new ways of working. And well done for your leadership. So this programme, as I said, has been funded by NHS England Improvement through the brilliant leadership of Jess Reed, who happens to be a Florence Nightingale Scholar, and the Chief Midwifery Officer for NHS England Eye, and that's Jackie. So I'm sure a lot of you know each other. You will have been part of a network, but what we hope at the end of this programme is that if you didn't know each other before, you've created a network with each other. This is your time. This is your time to take some time out for yourself, to concentrate on self for the time being. You deserve it. It's been a year like no other. And what a chance this is going to give you to kind of reignite you, to put the fire back in your belly, even if you might not have lost it. You're probably almost certainly running on empty. So take this time out, enjoy it, and use this opportunity wisely. Immerse yourself in the experience. It's a great time to be I can say this because I was a midwife many years ago, but it's a great time to be a midwife. You are the centre of all that's good about midwifery care, all that's good about person-centered care. So use this opportunity to increase your leadership, network with each other, and most importantly, to have a little bit of a rest. Stroke yourself, stroke your belly, tickle your tummies, and say that you deserve this. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Gemma Stacey, who's going to introduce the rest of the day. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you, Greta, and thank you for kicking us off with a welcome introduction to our directors and heads of midwifery out there in our audience. And before I talk you through the schedule of today, I'm going to introduce you to Jess, who you know as Deputy CMO of England. Jess has within her portfolio of responsibilities the leadership development of the midwifery workforce. And Jess approached us about the potential to do this project, oh gosh, probably 6 or 7, even longer months ago, because she absolutely knew that you guys in the positions that you are in, and the responsibilities and accountability that you have had over this period absolutely deserved this time and space to think around and reflect upon some of the challenges you've experienced and the implications that's had on yourselves and also the people that you've worked closely with. So this was Jess's brainchild. She knew it needed to happen. It's taken us a while to get here, but I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to Jess, who's going to offer you now some welcome messages.
Thank you so much, Gemma. I am so delighted that we've got to the 16th of March. This has been a long time coming, and so want to welcome every single one of you. We've got a good number, majority of the Homs and Doms that are joining this programme, and absolutely delighted, as I said, to be welcoming you to start this exciting pathway with the Florence Nightingale Foundation. I can remember starting my FNF program, my leadership scholarship program with Florence Nightingale, and full of all sorts of excitement. But my goodness, I mean, I was absolutely blown away by everything that I learned, the approach to the program that I undertook, and I've never, it really was a significant time in my life undertaking that program, and I really hope that this will be the same for you. When I first started talking to Gemma about what we felt would be helpful in this space, we were keen to move away from too many more leadership theory programs. So if that's what you've joined for, I'm afraid you might be disappointed. I don't think there's going to be loads and loads of theory and academic discussion about leadership styles and what have you. But what you will get is an incredible experience to help you and to reinforce your energy. The strapline on this slide says igniting leaders and fueling potential, and that's exactly what we want to see happen over this program and what I'm sure will happen. So please do sit back, enjoy. This is safe space for you, and contribute. And the more, as with all these things, the more you put into it, the more you will get out of it. And not only will you take away an awful lot for your own personal development and growth, but you'll find that being able to support colleagues on this journey as well will also give you a real boost as you see others, as you experience learning from one another and walking through this journey together. So enjoy it, everybody, and I look forward to meeting with you all again at the very, very end of the programme. And you know where I am if any of you need to contact me for any particular reason. But well done for joining, and enjoy it. Thanks very much, Gemma. I'll pass you back to Gemma now.
Thank you, Jess. That's wonderful. So I'll outline to you now the programme for the session and tell you a little bit more about the rest of the programme a little bit later on. So today we're going to split the session into two parts. The first part is around this topic of leading in challenging times. We'll take a short break, and then we're going to introduce you to the concept of psychological safety for organisations and teams, and how you might facilitate an approach to coaching, peer group coaching, that will enable psychological safety. Even though we're in this strange webinar format, we really do want to engage and hear from you. So as Jess said, the session itself is very much around responding to what we hear from you guys in the audience around some of the challenges that you've experienced, and drawing upon myself and Amy, who you'll meet in a moment's experience and expertise in how we can support you to think about ways of responding to these challenges. So what we'd like to hear from you, we've got two ways that you can connect with us. You've got the chat box where we would like you to share your thoughts and comments. You can do that at any time throughout the morning, and we'll pause at different points to ask you to share your thoughts and ideas in that chat box and take some time to reflect upon those with you. We've also scheduled in some Q&A sessions into the morning as well, and that is for us to specifically respond to the questions that you have. So there is a Q&A function here in Zoom. So if there's a question that you would like us to respond to in those particular sessions, please pop those questions into that Q&A function, and we'll keep an eye on those and respond to those in that point in the programme. We've also got a member of the team on the session today. His name's Adam. He's here in the background, but he's here to attend to any technical questions that you've got. So if you want to use either function, the chat or the Q&A, if you're having any problems technically, or if you've got any questions about the practicalities of the programme. So, so those things are covered in that way as well. At the moment, there's 65 of you out there in the audience across the whole of England, and we're absolutely thrilled that you've been able to make the time to join us this morning. So I'm going to hand over now to Amy Hart. I'm going to do it metaphorically and in reality. I'm going to give Amy the control of the slides. And Amy is half of an organisation called Heartridge that we work really closely at F&F. They are one of our most trusted associates. And Amy and her partner Nicola and I and Jess have worked really closely together to design the content of today's webinar. So Amy's going to start off with that first part of our webinar, which is focused around leading during anxious times. Thanks, Amy.
Gemma, thank you for the introduction. I'm spookily aware of how similar I look to my picture, apart from the sort of apart from the fact that I've got roots now and slightly split ends. So I do apologise for that. The lockdown love that we all have. As Gemma said, really, it's great to be here today. It's very unusual to be delivering this year so many webinars. Our company tends to do much more work with teams. So usually under normal circumstances, we'd be in organisations, working with teams, working with individuals. However, under the current circumstances, obviously we can't do that. So it's great to hopefully impact and support you in this way. So what are we? We're a micro company. That's the technical term because we're fairly small and nimble. We do have a number of associates that work with us and for us. Nicola and I run the company together. So Nicola, who's not here today, but is in spirit, was the Director of Leadership at the King's Fund for many years and also did work as a senior OD professional at the Home Office. So comes with lots of experience. The experience that we share is we've both been executive directors in the NHS. So we've got lots of experience at executive and board level. Our mission is to help build sustainable change in organisations. So what we are very wedded to is organisations not becoming dependent on us, but us coming in. I always say we're a bit like the nanny McPhee. So when you need us, we must stay. When you want us, that's time to go. So that's how we work with organisations. We tend to offer a lot of development programs and we offer one-to-one programs. So we'll offer things like coaching, culture change programs. So we sometimes are with organisations for 18 months. Other times they just want us to come in and do some individual work. We often work with what are classed as dysfunctional teams, although of course they're not dysfunctional when we get under the surface. And we advise on sort of strategy and business development. We do have contributors to this webinar. We have Dr. Jo Ramsden, who is a consultant clinical psychologist working in this field at the moment, and she has helped us with some of the content. What we're most proud of probably is that we're Florence Nightingale associates. So we do lots of work with Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale, we always say we only work with organisations that we like, and Florence Nightingale we love. So they're a fantastic organisation. They've got very deep-rooted values and beliefs, and they support people out there, such as yourselves, enormously well. So we are delighted and privileged to work with them. And our values very quickly have actually shifted. We've changed them in the last couple of years because we've decided that we've come into a slightly new world. So imagination, we're finding ourselves having to be quite imaginative at the moment, always compassionate. So we always work with compassion and empathy with individuals and organisations, and we're very flexible because we know things shift and change. So if you were in a room with me, we would be engaging with you. We would be asking lots of questions. We'd be getting you to do lots of group work. What I would like us to do, in order that I can ensure that the content that I've got for today is appropriate for you, I'd just like you to put in chat, if you are able. I know some of you might be listening to this while you're working or gardening or whatever it is you're doing today. But if you can, please pop in chat. What drew you to this webinar? So what were you either expecting or desiring of this morning's session? So just give you a few minutes to pop some things in chat. I love this. No real I won't read out who it's from. I'm sure you can see it on chat, but no real expectation, just time for ourselves. I love that. That's always great for me to hear. An opportunity to take some time and refocus, re-energizing and inspiring, checking in, time to reflect, taking some time for my own development and to take a breath after the merry-go-round of COVID, professional curiosity, a reboost, shared experience and learning from midwifery leaders, developing further skills to manage ever-changing landscapes, really hoping to hear that my struggles are not in vain and that I'm not alone in the challenges faced at the minute, constant and conflicting demands for information, motivation, how to build ongoing resilience, as it's not just tough because of COVID, it's tough to be in maternity services right now, absolutely. Grounding in leadership, it is easy to lose your way. Yeah, absolutely. Time out, opportunity for some time out. A new home came into the post during the pandemic. Wow. Feel you're emerging, connecting with others. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to look at that again when we go into the break to check out that I've covered everything. It's really good to hear that this is about just a bit of time, a time to pause and reflect, a time to really think about how you're coping and maybe some coping strategies. That's exactly what we're going to cover today. We hope it's inspiring, so we hope you get some useful thoughts and reflections out of this webinar. What we found when we ran this a week or so ago was people got as much out of the content as they did from the Q&A. So do please stay for the Q&A, because that tends to bring out some of the nuances to individual issues that people often connect with. Thank you. It's nice to feel you out there as well. So thank you for that. Okay. So let's get to the next slide. So the way that we're going to run today, or some of the content, we're going to start with some theory of leadership. Now, I'm aware that you're heads of midwifery, directors of midwifery, senior midwifery leaders today. So that's how we focus some of the content. However, this slide we put up with any leadership group because it beautifully describes the job of a leader, of any leader in any organisation or any context. It happens to come from the Centre for Creative Leadership, who are based in the States. The reason that we're aligned to them is because of the work of Michael West. I'm sure you've heard of Michael West, Professor Michael West. He does lots of work with NHS organisations. He set up a FINA OD over here. And his work is related to his original study, which was done 21 years ago, aligning team effectiveness with improved patient outcomes. So that's very much where he comes from. And the nuances to that work are around effective teams are led well, inclusively and compassionately. And very, very topically, I was reading today on Twitter the King's Fund article that has just been published, which 600,000 staff took part in, which was around burnout of staff following COVID. 600,000 NHS staff is 40% of the workforce, so a huge amount have filled it out. And at the kernel, if you haven't read it, at the kernel of that research talks about teams, individuals and organisations that are thriving are led well, and they're led inclusively and compassionately. So it all comes back to this work. So what does this model mean? So there's three areas to this and to any leadership role. There's the setting direction. So what's the vision for this particular team, organisation, system? Doesn't matter where you are, it's where are we headed? I would always say you wouldn't get in a taxi and say where you didn't want to go. You'd get in a taxi and be very clear about where you were going. So this is the same. You would set the direction of where you're going. Begin with the end in mind. The second part to this model is about aligning the activities, so creating alignment. And that's about what activities are you doing that align to that setting direction. It sounds really obvious, and yet how often are the day-to-day things that we're doing making a difference to the direction of travel or aligned with the direction of travel? When I coach people, I'll often ask people about their goals, where are you headed? And so a story of this I remember years ago was I was with a senior NHS leader, and they said, I really, really want to change my job. I want to get out and do something different. And this job's come up recently, but I haven't had time to do the application. So it was really good. It was just a very obvious setting direction, creating alignment. If you've got a set of direction, then you need to create that alignment. If that's the most important thing for that person, you need to do the job application, and you need to make that your priority. Please don't do job applications after this. And then the third is about inspiring commitment. So that's about keeping people with you. And generally we find with teams, when leaders do this well, then the commitment comes because people know where they're going. What they're working on matters and aligns with where they're going. So therefore they feel valued and valuable within the context of which they're working. Okay. Now, the second slide is about what we call level 5 leadership. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that term, understand that term, but I'm just going to very quickly describe it. This comes from the work of Jim Collins. So Jim Collins created the book Good to Great. That was about building sustainable organisations, so organisations that survive and thrive. Hugely applicable to the NHS at the moment. And he talks about levels of leadership. And you don't need level 5 leadership everywhere. You do need it at an executive level. Level 5 leadership, in a nutshell, is about the organisation. So when you look at his work, he talks about level 4 leadership is about you very often. Level 5 leadership is very much about the cause. So everything is driven to what's the cause, what's the context that we're working within. And he describes 2 important components of level 5 leaders: having very strong humility for the context that they're working and a very strong will. So these people understand what needs to be done, but also have a real drive for making it happen, making it work. And I'm going to come back to some of this a bit later on in the webinar to sort of align it with the most contemporary research that we've got on this at the moment. There's a little link. We won't look at the link. It's 1 minute, but you'll get these slides. If you want to go, in fact, I'll pop the link on chat when we finish. If you want to go on it, it's just a really nice, it's a quick description of level 5 leadership. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So that's all I was going to say about leadership. This isn't a leadership module, but it is about you working as leaders through these challenging times. So it was just it was a reminder really about the job of a leader and the level of leadership that we are aware that you remarkable people are working at. So now we're thinking about what's going on and what is making us stressed and anxious, and how is that manifesting itself within our working world. So what is stress and anxiety? So stress is a response to a threat in a situation. We kind of know that. We know that when we are stressed about something, when we are fearful about something, we get that fight, flight, freeze, automatic survival response. That happens at that point of stress. But anxiety, interestingly, is the reaction to that stress. So anxiety is a fear of what might happen in the future. not necessarily what is going to happen. So sometimes that fear is rational, i.e., it's based on what we know or what we've experienced, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's also based on our just ruminating and catastrophizing about what could happen. That's the bit that causes anxiety. Now, the impact of anxiety on us as leaders, and we will all have experienced that without doubt over the last 12 months, it can impair our judgment. It can cause us to focus on the wrong things. It can hugely distort the facts, or we can rush to conclusions because of that anxiety. Anxiety is often a very physiological response as well. So our heart is beating, we're sweating, our mind is rushing. I remember this is popped in my years ago, absolutely years ago. We went to Center Parcs, and I've got 2 teenage boys now, but they were very little at the time. And my youngest son got lost, and we couldn't find him. And we put over the tannoy, can you find this child? I remember even saying, can you find this child with a very badly cut fringe? Because I just cut his fringe that week. And I remember coming out, any of you that have been to the Center Parcs in Longleat, I remember coming out the door of Center Parcs, and there's a massive lake. And I remember standing there, and I just the anxiety started to build hugely in me. I thought, he's tiny, he's rushed towards the lake, and he's in the lake. None of it was based on what I knew of my son, being that he didn't particularly like cold water, that he wouldn't, that's the last place he'd go. It was completely anxiety driven around what could happen. And I remember that very strongly. And therefore, my mind did not work. I'm a very rational person. I'm a fairly logical person. All that went out the window. It's a real primitive response to stress. And that's what happened. What that means, therefore, is you are impaired in that moment. So there's something about when you're anxious, acknowledging it and thinking about, how is this helping me at the moment? What can I do about it? So the teal box that's on your slide, if you can see the slides, is anxiety is very normal. Acknowledgement and management of anxiety is key. But you'll notice I put, but what about the zebra? So what do I mean by that? If we think about, for a minute, zebras grazing in the savannah, and a lion comes up and attacks it. So they have a bit of a tussle. The zebra gets away, luckily, and the lion goes off. The zebra won't then sit for hours and ruminate about what just happened, not go back out there in the savannah, become completely paralyzed by fear and anxiety. The zebra, within a nanosecond, will be back out there in the savannah grazing. And if any of you watched the David Attenborough Perfect Planet, there's so many examples of this, where different species will just go back to what they were doing before, regardless of the possible danger that they're putting themselves in. So as lovely as that would be to do that, we're never going to be zebras. Anxiety exists in us for a reason. It's there as very much a response to stress. Management of it is possible. Management of it is needed at the moment. So that's a bit about stress and anxiety. What we now want to talk about is our company has been working with Florence Nightingale and other companies in the NHS to work with teams. So we've worked over the last 12 months with a number of different teams. I'm tempted to say about 200 different teams. And there's things we've noticed that make leaders feel more anxious. And the next slide is about, we've also noticed things that make leaders feel more energized. Now, as I read through these, some of these may chime with you. Some of them you may think, that hasn't made me anxious, or it hasn't made me energized. So this is these are themes. They're not necessarily individual. So you may notice some of these chime with you, and you may notice they don't. So there's definitely been, over the last 12 months, a sense from leaders about getting it wrong. And we notice this with leaders anyway. Whenever we do any leadership development, very often people will think that there is a right way to do something. And of course there isn't. There's always a better way. Always. We could, sit there and think about, gosh, I could have done X, Y, and Z better. But there's very rarely a getting it wrong. And yet people feel there's a sense of that. Upsetting staff is something that's come out hugely. So asking staff to do things at short notice or different to their skill set has been a huge thing. And the goodwill and morale of staff is really important. We know that in terms of as a leader. Lack of staff, of course, is huge. Again, that's something that's come out of the King's Fund review. Lack of democracy. So not always being able to really discuss with staff what's going on and some options, because sometimes we haven't been able to do that. We just had to decide and deliver in a timescale. Not making the right decisions for patients has been huge. So having to compromise on patient care. I know that a lot of the clinical leaders and non-clinical leaders that we work with, this is really difficult. Not appearing resilient enough. So a real sense of, I have to be the one that is getting up, getting in and cracking on. I can't show cracks because my team are struggling. So I want to come back to that. Not being physically present or connected enough. So a lot of people have had to shield. We work with an organisation where the chief executive has been shielding for what feels like 12 months. That's really tough. And yet it's what we've had to deal with, and so much learning in that. Not knowing what they will face each day. I can't imagine. I'm a big planner. So I can't imagine what that would feel like to go in and just not know what the day is going to face. That could bring huge anxiety to some people. And then the final one is another layer of anxiety from the world outside of work. So having to juggle children, parents, caring responsibilities, all the stuff that we didn't have to worry about before. As a mum, having to juggle all the stuff from children and schooling, etc., is enormous. So those are the things that we've noticed that can make leaders anxious. We've also noticed some things that energize leaders. Pace of change for some has been really nice. So great, I've been waiting for this for a long time and it's just happening. I was looking again, it might have been Twitter, but there was I would live in Bath. So our local hospital was putting something on Twitter about how they've developed a ward in what feels like 4 days. So the pace of change has been huge. Being nimble and agile, so maybe having some, dare I say it, not all the regulations and not all the requirements from our regulators and people around us, and just having a sense of support from the organisation to get on with it and not get in the way. So a real sense of being able to control things and get on with them. New ways of communicating. I mean, who knew that we'd spend all our lives on Teams and Zoom and all the rest of it? That's been huge for people. We have, for instance, decided that our coaching offer, because we coach so many people around the country, will continue to be virtual probably forevermore, because our outcomes are as good and it's easier for people to find the time. Being creative, so being able to think of things in a different way, with a different mindset, and with different people very often. So some people have said, gosh, I've been working with loads of different people that I wouldn't have done before COVID. Being part of the NHS solution, so really feeling for once valued by the public for what you are doing, and everybody being valued, particularly at the start of COVID, where even I was knocking on district nurses' doors when they were sat in their cars outside home saying thanks very much. And I work within the NHS and with the NHS. So it's been huge. More meaningful conversations stroke interactions. So sometimes people have found what energizes them is, wow, I've been waiting to really talk about patient safety for years in a way that's really meaningful and allows us to really focus on it. And not knowing what they will face each day for some has been hugely energizing. Now in the teal box, you'll notice, remember, all of this will drive a set of behaviours. What I mean by that is, if I am anxious about something, like the previous slide, if I'm anxious about getting it wrong, that might drive a set of behaviours in me. So I may appear more underconfident, I may be a bit fumbly about what I'm doing, I might go back on a decision. All of this will drive a set of behaviours. If I'm energised by something like, I don't know, being nimble and agile, I may be more confident about it. I may be more articulate about it. I may be more energized about it. I may be more influential about it. So remember that how I'm feeling might just affect my outcomes as a leader. So that's why we put this slide up. Not to beat you with, because all these things are very natural, but to notice that it might have an impact on you and your influence as a leader. So just before I go on to the research around, okay, so what do we need to do as leaders? How do we need to think about this? I love this diagram. This is about performance. And it's just really to remind us that stress is a good thing to a degree. So we want people to be a little bit aroused, as I would call it. Because we know if people are too much in their comfort zone, then they don't learn and they don't perform at their optimum level. And we also know if people are too stretched, so if you're getting into the strain box, then that can lead to a poorer performance. But that kind of oscillating, the stretch in the comfort zone, that's the key. And the reason I put it up there is because if you can manage your stress where you are able to kind of straddle that stress and comfort zone, you will be at your optimum performance. And again, I'm going to give you some examples of how to do that, and Gemma later as well, in terms of some of the psychological safety stuff. So just have that in your mind, which is it's a good thing to have a level of arousal, but not so much so that you're in the kind of fatigue and poor judgment place. Okay, so what does the 2020-2021 research tell us? So we've been doing that for you. We've been looking at the research and we've been looking at what that might mean for you as leaders. And we're kind of delighted that it fits with what we know anyway. This isn't new stuff. This is stuff that we already know around dealing in a crisis. So what leaders need during a crisis is not a predefined response plan. And that's anxiety provoking. So what we know, how we lead, the way that we are, the plans that we have don't necessarily work in a crisis. You have to come back to a kind of very core way of working. Behaviours and mindsets are absolutely key, and that will prevent you from overreacting to yesterday's developments and help you look ahead. So rather than focusing on an approach and a temperament or a style, okay, actually it's about how I behave and what my mindset is, going back to the previous slides. We know, but regardless of a crisis, the most important thing that any leader can do is the way that they role model to their staff. So it doesn't matter what you say, if you're not doing it yourself, then people will not follow. So 2 leadership behaviours that help in a global crisis, according to the research, and make sense, are deliberate calm. So that's the ability to detach from a fraught situation and think clearly about how to navigate it. You know, going back to my 2-3-year-old son years ago, my goodness me, didn't I need this? Didn't I need that ability to just centre myself and think, okay, let's just think calmly about what I need to do here. What's the response that I need? And it's a muscle that if you use it, it will get bigger and brighter and be more responsive. So that deliberate calm. And the second is what we call bounded optimism. And that's not being a tigger about everything. It's about confidence combined with realism. So this means that leaders project confidence that the organisation will find a way through its tough situation. Otherwise, people lose hope. And hope is so important. So ability to remain calm and ability to project that confidence. John Maxwell is what we would call a level 5 leader. So when Jim Collins did the research, he focused on 11 level 5 leaders and followed them for a number of years to sort of distill what some of the qualities were. And there's lots of talks from him out there. He's now a pastor in the States, and he talks about people do what people see. His work is, he's got some lovely quotes. So he's got things like, everything worth having is uphill. And I think that's really helped me at times when I'm struggling. You have to go through stuff if it's worth it. You have to go through stuff if it's going to make a difference. Even if it's a crisis, even if it's imposed, it's going to be hard work. So if we recognise that, that's part of our journey and part of our development. So what else does the 2020 research tell us? Well, it tells us that it's vital that leaders not only demonstrate empathy, but open themselves to empathy from others and remain attentive to their own well-being. What that means is, in order to be calm, detached, thoughtful, and hopeful, we need to look after ourselves. It's an obvious one, isn't it? But it's so important. And it comes up time and time again, which is you can't look after others if you're not looking after yourselves. It will show over a period of time. So as stress, fatigue, and uncertainty build up during a crisis, leaders might find their abilities to process information, to remain level-headed, and exercise good judgment diminish. When we're rested, when we are, after a holiday, for instance, we find it easy to walk in and assess a situation. We think, why were we worried about this? Because we've had a rest, because we're thinking clearly, because we've had plenty of sleep and all the rest of it, all the restorative stuff. But this is thinking about when you haven't got this stuff, what happens? So what they're saying is, if those things are building up, they will stand a better chance of countering those declines if they encourage others to express concern and they express concern to themselves, i.e. look after themselves. Investing time in your well-being will enable leaders to sustain their effectiveness over the weeks and months that a crisis can entail. And that is exactly what this is all about. This isn't about quick fixes. This is about a sustainability to your ongoing improvement. I was listening to I've got very into podcasts, and I was listening to this guy who lives quite locally to me, actually, who is an MP and has transformed himself. So he's lost something like 7 stone over lockdown. And what he talked about is, I suddenly realised that this was lifelong, that in order for me to create a better self, and he did it for COVID reasons, he did it for health reasons. This isn't just right, I'll do it this week and then crack on. This was a lifelong lesson for me to sustain it. This is exactly the same with well-being. It's a practice, it's a muscle that we need to have really firmly rooted in order to be effective leaders. It's a selfless thing to do. So now we'll get on to the last few slides are what could help you. This list comes from the Harvard Business Review article, which is Leading Through Anxiety. They've got some great stories and tips we've got it in the reference slide from today. So I'll just go through this to hopefully bring it a bit to life for you to understand. So know yourself. So going back to that point about anxiety, Know your triggers, know yourself, know what challenges you and how you respond, and know when that's helpful and when it's not. I certainly know the things that I find difficult. You know, I've learned those over the time. I'll have lots of others, I'm sure, that will crop up in my career. But knowing yourself is really, really key. They talk about relabeling anxiety as temporary uncertainty. So there's a really good equation, which is what we, the language we use drive the thoughts that we have, which drive the feelings that we have and affect the results that we make. It's quite CBT, but it makes sense, doesn't it? So how we call something, how we label something might affect how we think about it and how we feel about it. So you might want to relabel anxiety such as temporary uncertainty, or even something positive, which is, oh, hello, you're back. Right, I need to use you in a good way. I need to recognize this. This is temporary. I won't always feel like this, and I will manage it and cope with it. Your emotions are normal. It's okay to feel anxious. So again, another great reference, Susan Jeffers' book, who's sadly not with us anymore, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I think all our leadership programs, we always suggest that people read this. I read it years ago and I read it again recently, and I learned things from it reading it again. It's a great, great book. And it is literally about that. Feel that fear, feel that anxiety, keep going. And you will grow and stretch and develop. Anxiety is a powerful enemy, so we must make it our partner, subconscious or conscious. So again, that's about just the management and acknowledgement of it. Be genuine. So the bit about going back to the slide previous, which was about doing or saying the wrong thing, you've just got to say what you know to be true in that moment. So sometimes people, it came up from the last webinar, people say, I really didn't know what to say at the start of COVID, or at the moment, in fact. People, that's okay. Just say what you know to be true. It will serve you well. Things shift. I always give the examples. So I follow Sarah Jarvis on Twitter, and she talks about, she's a GP that works a lot for the BBC. And she said, I've had to change because the evidence has changed. And she said, that's really hard for me because that doesn't happen very often at the pace it has. I like to say what I know. I like the facts. So she's had to do that, and she's had to acknowledge that that's been a shift for her. Now, doing the best you can. Perfect is the enemy of good. I want to come back to that. I want to come back to that on my last slide, so I'll come back to that. Know your safe team. So where's your support infrastructure? Michael West talks about your home team, the team that you feel safe with, secure with, that you can really talk about what's going on. Again, Gemma's going to talk about this when she talks about your safe environment. And it may be that that's something that's evolved for you or emerged for you over this time, or it may be something you've always had. And be compassionate to yourself and others. Again, I'm going to come back to that. And there's a lovely quote there, which is, I've learned that people will forget what you did, they will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So again, just something to think of as a leader in terms of being true to yourselves. So what else? This is probably the, going back to the Nanny McPhee, this is the key lesson from today, really, which is, in order to look after others, in order to lead others through and yourself, you have to put your own mask on ahead of others. So you have to look after yourselves. Evidence of working with compassion towards self and others has a positive impact on you and others' well-being and performance. So therefore, why wouldn't you do it? It's a smart and wise move for you to be as effective as possible. Qualities of compassion are patience and wisdom, kindness and perseverance, and warmth and resolve. So some really lovely qualities there. We've put some questions up for you. The reason that we've put these questions up is mostly because we have to practice this ourselves. So do you treat yourself as you would treat a friend or colleague? So when those moments when you are being what I would call critical voice, critical internal voice to yourself, i.e., why did you do that? Should have done that better. What were you thinking? All those kind of negative things. Would you say that to a friend or colleague? Or would you boost them and champion them and say, you did great. You did as much as you could do. What else could you do in that moment? You would be their ambassador. Do you practice mindfulness? So this is a state of recognizing your thoughts, whether they are thoughts, negative thoughts or positive thoughts, but not judging them, just recognizing that they're there, and then choosing how you're going to respond to them. So something that's really, really important, that moment of, actually, this is the time when I'm going to choose to just be calm and accept that I've got lots of thoughts going on in my head, and recognize them, even write them down before I react. Stimulus, response. There's a choice bit in the middle. Do you ask for help and accept help? So for me as a leader, this is something that I've learned in my 40s, I would say. I didn't have it before. I had this sense of I had to be a certain way. I had to be this perfect leader. So that's why I wanted to come back to that state about being perfect. I had to have everything. I had to have all the answers right. I had to lead with integrity. I had to be very present for my teams. I had to lead with collaboration, etc., etc. I spent my whole time thinking I had to be like this. What I was not good at was asking for help when I wasn't sure. So I was great at giving it out, I think, and supporting people. What I was not good at doing sometimes was asking for help. And very often those who are helping others, and I would say nurses and midwives can often be in this category, great at dishing out help for others, but not necessarily thinking about themselves. You know, how often have you said to someone, go home, rest, don't think about it, don't worry, I'll do that. And do you do that to yourself? And the last one is aligned to that, which is, do you give yourself permission to be imperfect? Oh, well, I could have done that better. I could have done everything better. That's life. I did my best in that instance. Do you write at the end of every day what you did well that day? Do you give yourself a pat on the back? Because it's a lonely business being a leader at the moment in these times. So my final slide is about we're not conditioned to be zebras. So we have to recognise that anxiety is there, and how we manage it and acknowledge it is really important. We have to notice that so the team observations, people are going through this. You are not alone. Everybody is experiencing this. Doesn't matter how senior or how junior, different things will stress different people and cause anxiety. And people will be feeling alone and feeling vulnerable and feeling fragile and probably often looking to you. The deliberate calm and the bounded optimism are really important behaviours to think about during this time. If they're a muscle that you can practice, have a think about that. Think about your support network. Gemma's going to talk a bit more about that. Think about who's around you. Think about who can support you over the next few months going forward, and how you can support yourself. And finally, work with compassion towards yourself and towards others, because that will help you in to endure this time. That's been seen as the most important component. We have some references, but we will put those out to you after today. So I'm going to ask Gemma to join me. And we are now going to use this time as the time for you to think about what we've talked about and to put any questions in chat so we can work through any individual questions or thoughts or topics that you would like to.
Thank you, Amy. And I think I found so much of that content so engaging, but also relevant to what we've been hearing through the support sessions we've been offering to nurses and midwives throughout the whole of this experience. So I hope that our audience members found that helpful too. As Amy said, we'd like to invite you now to ask questions, pose questions to myself and Amy, either about what you've heard or about other elements. Whilst people are doing that, I just thought it'd be helpful, Amy, if we reflect back on some of the content that came up in the chat earlier in your response to that question you asked around what's brought you here. And there was definitely a theme there around taking some time out as a senior leader for self. And I particularly picked up on that as a real aspect, and links a lot to some of the content that you've described there. I wondered, Amy, what your thoughts and experiences have been of how senior leaders have prioritised their own well-being during this time.
I have lots of thoughts on this. I'm conscious this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway, really badly. I think, so we work very often with chief execs running a huge organisation, executive directors, who we will say, the first thing we'll say is, how are you? Very often, what then follows is a huge barrage of, it's really tough. It's really, really tough. And then when we scratch under the surface, they haven't had any leave. They've not been practicing all the things that they know as a good leader that they need to do in terms of surrounding themselves with people that's a support bubble, taking time out. I always say I do the best thinking very often when I'm walking up the road, or I'm in the shower, or I'm not when I'm sat at work looking at a screen, or when I'm in work. So again, when I'm on the pitch, you can't necessarily think and do all the things well when you are literally in the fire, if you like. So unfortunately, I don't think people, not through any intent, but it's just gone for people. They were mindful of it for the first wave, but they were mindful of not worrying about looking after themselves because they thought it would end quickly. Now we're 12 months in, and it's really taking its toll. So for me, it's just about going back to basics. Have you got your leave booked in? Have you got your, if you've got your leave booked in, have you got your support mechanism around you? How are you managing each day? So just looking at your days or your weeks, what rest periods have you got in? When do you do your best thinking, and how can you support that? What are you anxious about? Do you need a coach, etc.? So all those sorts of things. It is just going back to the basics of being an effective leader, essentially.
Absolutely, and thinking of that language of this is a marathon and not a sprint. So some of the strategies that we've maybe justified because we thought this is about a crisis response, and totally justified in thinking that was the right thing to do when we didn't know very much about what we were facing. But now, a year later, we need to be thinking about how we can keep up that endurance to continue to respond to the rapid change and the uncertainty and the challenges that inevitably are ahead. Without a doubt. And Gemma, I'm conscious you're a mental health nurse by background, and you must have found this in terms of people going through any sort of therapy. It's a crutch, isn't it? It's a long term, it's not a quick fix. And if you can have something in place like a safe space or time off or whatever it is that works for you, and not lose that, not just cancel it out your diary, then that's absolutely essential. It is something that is so selfless to have, because how you are with people will be a consequence of how you feel yourself and how you're managing yourself. So it's a selfless thing to do, not a selfish thing to do, which is looking after yourself. And you mentioned about role modelling, Amy, about how the consequences, even if you're encouraging your staff to do these things, to take time out for themselves, to prioritise their own well-being, but you're not doing those things yourself, you're not enacting or role modelling those types of behaviours, that has implications. And I wondered if you wanted to expand a bit more on that.
Yes, very happy to. Hugely. So again, actually McKinsey is a really good evidence base to this. So McKinsey did a piece of work before COVID about the influence model, and that was around large scale change. So why in some organisations does large scale change not work? Because they did all the right things. So they had a compelling reason for the change. They had reinforcing mechanisms. in the organisation to reinforce the change. They skilled up their staff to deal with the change. And then the final one was about role modelling the change. Now, you can do the other three, but if you don't do the fourth one and role model the change, whatever that is, staff might commit to it for a while, comply to it for a while, but they won't commit to it because they don't see you doing it. It's exactly the same as, you know, I often use the home example because it's similar. It's like, you know, saying to your kids, don't eat sweets, and then you're sat there eating them. It's exactly the same. People will just pick up on how you are. And I guess that's I'm conscious as I say that's a gift under pressure, isn't it? So it means, what it doesn't mean is you have to be perfect, because otherwise your staff will feel they have to be perfect. It means, you know, by being a learned, reflective leader, that's a really good thing, because your staff will pick that up and know that that's okay for them to do so. You know, if you're a leader that doesn't look at blaming others, but looks at learning what's going on, all those kind of things, the staff will pick them up. So yeah, I think I not only know it's important from the research, but as a leader myself, when I was in organizations, and even now working as a consultant, the way that I work with teams and clients, I have to be very mindful of this. I can't be saying to people, you have to be compassionate and inclusive in your teams, if I'm not seen as doing that with the way I work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of the strongest themes that's come through our Nightingale Frontline Leadership Support Service was from both perspectives. Those on the front line of care saying there was something about authenticity in the leadership. So this kind of courage really to be honest about the impact that this was having on them, as well as knowing that it was having impact on other staff. So some of the most senior leaders saying, you know, I'm finding this difficult as well. And being able to be very authentic with how it was impacting on them. It increased trust and it increased a kind of collegiate approach as well to how to manage the problems. So again, it's that sometimes that pressure we put on ourselves to have all the answers or appear to be able to respond and cope to everything because we've got a senior leadership role can sometimes be counterproductive to our teams. It's not what they actually need to see.
It reminds me very quickly before we come off it, when I did my coaching qualification years ago, at the time they talked about boundaries being really, really important, and as coach it's all about the other, which is right, it's all about the other person, and boundaries are hugely important with coaching. And the belief of any coaching is that person that you're coaching has all the answers and you're there to ask the right questions. The reason that I think it's interesting is the evidence has slightly shifted that the relationship of coaching will become even better if there's some disclosure from the coach about their experiences and what they found difficult, which is different to how it used to be. And the reason for that is based on exactly what you say, is a little bit of disclosure makes people feel less alone. And that, you know, we don't put people on pedestals that they're not experiencing it, but I'm experiencing it, therefore I must be failing. So it's really important that leaders at every level are honest about their own struggles, because it also inspires people that if they're struggling, they seem to be still coping.
Yes.
They seem to be still managing it well. So yeah, hugely important. That just reminded me. Thank you for thinking about that.
And related to this, we've got a question from Penny that asks about how the command control model of leadership that has been required at times during the response to the pandemic, how can you adopt that approach alongside maintaining the kind of inclusive, authentic, compassionate leadership style that we've just discussed?
That's fascinating. Thank you for that. Was it Penny, did you say?
Penny, yeah.
Thank you, Penny. And this came up at our last webinar, I think, didn't it?
It did.
So it's a really good question. What's interesting about this question is if you go back to the first model that we had on this webinar, which was about setting direction, then it's okay to tell people what to do. Nicola and I have noticed as we've been working with teams, is sometimes people are a bit worried about that. People are worried that that they shouldn't be telling people what to do. It's absolutely okay to set a direction. Sometimes the nuance, however, is in how you do it. So this is what we need to achieve. The difficulty comes in sometimes as a leader when we are prescribing to people how to do things. If we can keep some autonomy for individuals, that can be hugely helpful. So again, another very quick bit of theory. We know in terms of motivation of individuals, everybody's motivated by three things. Once you pay them enough to get money off the table, three things motivate everyone: purpose, so knowing why; autonomy, so being able to get on with it; and mastery, which is about feeling competent. So if you apply those to COVID, some of those haven't necessarily been there all the time. So the mastery, i.e. people feeling competent in a new role or a different role, you might need to encourage that a bit more, that people can do it. The purpose, I think people have been really clear about that. This is the way it is, guys. It won't be forever. We're all having to do different things, but it's for the bigger purpose. So therefore, the only bit that sometimes can be a bit hijacked is the autonomy. So if as a leader, if you are in a command and control structure, if you can just think about, if I'm setting direction, how can I make sure that I don't meddle too much in the how we're doing things? That would be my sort of gut feeling. Gemma, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I had some executive coaching recently and took this exact same dilemma to my coach, and one of the things that stuck with me that she said was that your role is to set the expectation and the direction. How that person then goes about achieving those things is where they bring in their own autonomy and develop their capability and confidence. So it's the command control has been very clear about what that expectation is for the needs of the organisation, or to respond to the executive board, or to a policy that's been imposed on us from up above. But what we can offer people is that space to have creativity and autonomy in how they go about achieving those things. And I've seen that put into practice and that have quite an effective way, because in a situation like this, in a crisis situation, actually that very clear direction around what is expected is quite reassuring for people. It does offer those boundaries. So people are feeling quite safe with that clear direction, but still wanting to have their own expertise and experience, that knowledge to shape how things are responded to on the ground.
Definitely. Can I say a very quick story?
Yeah, go for it.
So years ago, we were making big cuts in an organisation. It was an NHS organisation. And we decided, rather than telling everybody how they needed to make these cuts, we would just say, this is how much you need to save in your area. We don't care how you do it. Mm. And some of the things that came back were incredible. So I do remember a group of senior nurses said, actually, we don't want to make cuts to X, Y, or Z, but we all want to go 4 days a week. So we're all going to give up a day. And this is a long time ago. And I appreciate that at the moment there's huge staff shortages. So I hope I'm not being flippant around that. But it was just a way of saying, we don't care how you do it. Just come back to us with what you're going to do, and we'll put it in place. It was, and people loved it. So there is something about that, definitely.
Thank you. Great question. Thank you. And just noticed that Mitra in the chat has said command control is okay as long as staff have been central to what you are commanding, and they are shown how things are to progress, as opposed to being told what to do. This is the difference between bossing as opposed to leading. So really helpful comment, that. Thank you.
Really helpful. Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you.
There's a couple of questions, Amy, that have come up around the impact of technology and the new way of working, which initially was seen as being really efficient because we didn't have travel time in between things. We could squeeze in more appointments. We seemed to be able to respond really quickly to requests for meetings, those types of things. But actually now, as we said before, as time is progressing, a couple of our attendees today have said, actually, this is becoming incredibly burdensome and draining, and there's no time out to think. or even to meet those very basic needs around, you know, hydration and a good diet throughout the day, because everything is so back to back.
Yeah, I think there's two bits in there. I think there is something about what this virtual world has meant for our communication. And I said to someone recently, it's a bit like doing my job with one eye shut constantly, because we know, don't we, in terms of communication, our body language, our interaction with people is a huge part of that. And I think what I do know, I don't know where I got this from, but productivity has gone down, hasn't it? So at the start of COVID, it went up. People got used to this, working at home, working remotely. They were energized by it. Now productivity has gone down. So real estate, so capital buildings, etc., people were really worried about, but now they're not so much, because they know that productivity has gone down and people will come back because they want to be in the workplace and are choosing to be in the workplace. So everybody's experiencing that. I think the bit about the back-to-back, I feel, and I'm going to sound, I hope this comes from a place of good intent. You have to control that. So, very good friend of mine is a chief executive, and every time I meet her, she says, it's just relentless. And the only thing I can say back is, you constantly say that. What are you going to do about it? You have to push back on it, because it goes back to, it's selfless to do that, because then you can be yourself, then you can be your best. And whatever works for you, you need to think about. So if it is having that 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and in that time, do you sit at your screen and do emails, or do you actually go and walk around the block or something? You know, all those kind of personal choices. Unfortunately, it's hard to do, because often we don't want to do the things that we need to do because we haven't got the energy to do them, because we're in urgent and important all the time. So we're flipping into not important, not urgent, because we're knackered. So therefore, we don't want to go out for a walk, or we don't want to, you know, take time off the screen. We just want to get through it. But it's so important. It's absolutely so important, because otherwise we won't sustain it, and it will come out in different ways. So we know that it will come out in a, you know, slightly passive aggressive way, or you know, with our families. So it's really important to keep that constant renewal.
And I wonder if one of the things that we're not necessarily picking up on is how other industries are managing this. So in other corporations, for example, there's a rule that that meetings are always 45 minutes, not an hour, and that there's a 15-minute gap in between those meetings. 15 minutes is not enough time for somebody to squeeze in another meeting. So you take that 15 minutes just to reflect on what actions are needed, perhaps a conversation that's happened, or prepare for what's coming next. So some very basic kind of rules that we can look and see what's working in other industries and bring them into the ways that we're working could be really effective.
And if it's not working for you, I'm thinking that we're talking to a very senior group today.
Yeah.
If it's not working for you, it's probably not working for anybody. So there's something about having the bravery to say, look, guys, these back-to-back meetings are not working for me. I need a break in between. Why don't we talk about a 45-minute or 50-minute meeting? Coca-Cola have 29-minute meetings, no more. So, you know, so you're absolutely right. It is culture driven, but it's okay as a senior leader, I think, to say this isn't working, because we know that we're not getting time in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question that's linked to everything, I think, that we've said, and probably my sense is related to our next webinar, which is around managing upwards, which is about how we deal with the expectations that are placed upon us. So we can say we'll implement these great initiatives for looking after staff wellbeing, we'll role model them ourselves, but then we get a directive from exec that says drop everything, we need you to attend to this now. This now requires you to throw all of those things out of the window and do what we've asked. I just wonder what you think, Amy, about how, for people in the position of our audience today, how do they respond to those kinds of requests and potentially demands?
There's no easy answer to this, I don't think, because it depends a bit on your it depends a bit on what it is and what your organisational context is. I would say, though, people around you will be noticing how much you absorb and how much you push back. And that's the job of a leader. So I think you're right, Gemma. This speaks beautifully to our next webinar, which will be about managing upwards. And how very often we are much more skilled at managing and leading and motivating and mobilizing the team that we manage directly, as opposed to putting just as much energy into managing above us and around us. We can get really frustrated by it, but not think about how can I be a custodian of it? And that's the key, really. So I don't have a particularly eloquent do this or do that, but I do think there's something about a judgment of, so I know for me, there are times when I've just point blank refused. When you're in my profession, so as an HR director, you have to sometimes, you just have to do that because there's some crazy stuff that has come out that you think there's just no way we're going to do that and do it well. So it's okay sometimes to push back, and only you know your own leaders and execs around you. I generally don't think that anybody wants to make other people's jobs harder. So maybe having that conversation about, can I understand a bit more about this? So being curious about what it is, why it's needed, what the timescale is. That's absolutely the job of a leader to do. You know, that's okay to not just accept and absorb everything, to sometimes push back. And then other times, yeah, we have to be the post box, as we would call it. But it's a bit of a judgment. And again, going back to judgment, I think you can make a better judgment when you are in a good space. So when you are looking after yourself, we can manage that better without it consuming us.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Do you know what? There was a comment earlier in the chat box about wicked problems, and I think this is that, isn't it? This is an issue that actually has so many different elements and contextual, political, hierarchical, cultural, historical, all of those things are playing out into why this is particularly challenging. And we heard from Jess in preparation for these webinars that this is particularly challenging for HOMs and DOMs because the representation of a smaller workforce and sometimes being the only midwifery voice within an executive team, or not even having permission to contribute to that executive team, is a kind of power battle that's happening frequently for those of you in your position. And that's really the reason why we wanted to focus that whole webinar, our next webinar, on that particular topic. But we're getting some helpful strategies that people are offering in the chat box as to ways to respond to this. So keep those going, because you guys will be managing these on a day-to-day basis, and you may just help each other out there.
Definitely.
We've got a question that's come up about supporting a colleague, and I'm going to keep that one on hold for a moment because it relates really well to our next part of the session. And what we're going to do now is to take a break, and we're going to ask you to do exactly what we've just described. So we'll come back at 25 to 11:35. But we would like you not to check your emails in that time. Either go and have a bit of fresh air, make yourself a drink, move away from the screen for a moment, and come back to us for the next half of our session refreshed and ready to absorb some ideas around how we create these kinds of psychological safe spaces that do rejuvenate and restore us, so that we can continue to lead and support in the challenges that we face in. So we'll see you back at 11:35. Thank you, and thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Gemma.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a chance to have a bit of breath of fresh air, maybe make yourself a drink, a little bit of time away from the screen, and resisted that 15 minutes to check emails. So the next part of our session is very much around structures and strategies that we might use to be able to create environments which facilitate psychological safety, not only within our own teams, but across the wider organisation, taking into account the influential role that you potentially have in influencing this particular area. Now, psychological safety to me as a mental health nurse is part of my bread and butter, and it's also been the focus of some research and practice development that I've been undertaking over the last 15 years. So for those of you that are in organisations that implement resilience-based clinical supervision, this is an example of a strategy for psychological safety. I know that the midwifery advocacy role and the newly formed nursing advocacy role facilitates and supports restorative supervision. And similarly, the Nightingale Frontline service that we provide here at F&F is another example of this. And I'm sure there'll be lots of different examples within your own organisations which label themselves as structures for psychological safety. But what I want to offer you today is just to break that down a little bit, to demystify that concept to you, so that you can think about the many different ways that you can create that culture of psychological safety within your organisation. One of the dangers as a result of the pandemic and a newfound awareness of the mental health and emotional wellbeing needs of staff is that we've been looking to psychologists, psychotherapists, mental health professionals to provide an intervention which deals with distress, mental health and illnesses and distress. And that's not the same thing as this. That will be appropriate for a very small minority of staff whose distress has become unmanageable and impacting on their ability to keep themselves safe and well, and perhaps also their practice as well. So it's really important that we differentiate between these things. What this is about is relationships that offer a level of validation and empathy which enables that person to feel a psychological containment to manage the very challenging nature of the work that they do. And this is not relevant just to the pandemic. It's been relevant to us as healthcare professionals throughout our whole career, because every single day we experience emotional consequences of our role purely because of the nature of what it is we do. So just to reiterate that message, the idea of psychological containment isn't a new one, but it has become much more recognised and utilised within policy and within the media representation of what's needed in the pandemic's response. But it was right back in 1962 when Bayern started to talk about the nature of a relationship that provides psychological containment. There's been lots and lots of different research that looks at how this is achieved in a therapy situation. But I've added a link to a paper at the bottom of this slide, which talks about how psychological containment can be utilised as a model to support healthcare workers or emergency response workers to manage their emotions that have arisen from dealing with a crisis. So this particular paper talks a lot about those people involved in the response to the 9/11 tragedy and how psychological containment was utilised as a way to mitigate some of the more serious mental health issues that may result as a consequence, such as PTSD. So put really simply, containment in a relationship is just about how you receive and understand the emotion that a person is communicating to you. When we do it, what we need to do is offer an empathetic and validating response. What I mean by that is just to normalise it. You know, this is a very typical and human response to a very challenging situation. And because we have that normalisation reaction, we don't become overwhelmed by that person's distress. Now, again, you might be thinking, you know, as a HOM or a DOM, why is this relevant to me? There are people in my organisation who have the specialist skills to deliver this. You know, there are psychologists, there are people trained in clinical supervision. But actually, a paper that came out from a guidance paper that came out from the British Psychological Society said that it is actually significance of the leadership that will be the most influential aspect of how we respond to the emotional needs of our staff during the pandemic. And they put visible leadership as number one in their principles. And very much the kinds of things that you've heard already from Amy. So it's about being visible, available and supportive. Where you can, it's about guiding people to the resources and the support that's available to them. But you don't need to have all of the solutions. We just need to be able to help that person tolerate the uncertainty of the situation, and also to be able to tolerate our own uncertainty with this situation as well. Identified in this guidance is how important it is to role model self-compassion, because people will follow your practices and they will see how you're prioritizing your own well-being, and that will inadvertently give permission for them to do the same. But the British Psychological Society are very clear that you as leaders are best placed to provide and also to define what is needed in terms of this psychological containment for your staff. They acknowledge that psychologists have an expertise that may help you to shape what this is, but they very much focus on this is not about a professional expertise and intervention. It's about how we communicate with our teams to enable this to be part of routine. It's part of the culture. It's what we do around here. So I'm going to break this idea of containment down into a process. And when I talk about containment, what I'm really referring to is a relationship, and it's relationship between people, or a relationship with a particular environment that's created that enables emotions to be contained and processed. So what happens in this container is that the container takes something that has either happened or something that somebody does or feels, and they don't react to that immediately. So they absorb that particular event situation. And the person is given the opportunity to project into that container, that relationship, whether it be a one-to-one or a group, the kinds of feelings and experiences that at that moment in time just feel impossible to them to put into words. So they're struggling to articulate and make sense of the implications of that particular situations on their own well-being. And what happens within that process is that the relationship, through a process of reflection, through reflecting back and noticing some of the external cues and influences that the container sees, we create an opportunity for the person to see a different understanding. Often it's about helping that person to see the wood for the trees. It's that kind of analogy. Whilst they're in the centre of it, they're in that anxious response. They're blinkered, they're focused on survival. They can't see the wider, the bigger picture that's contributing to either how they're responding or how they're initiating responses in others. So what the container or the relationship does is to notice those things and reflect them back to that person, helping them to make sense of it. And once those feelings and experiences have been processed in that particular relationship, we can start to figure out how to move forward from it. So something that can feel very overwhelming through this process can start to feel like something that's more manageable, and there's something, actions that we can take around dealing with those things. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is to reflect in the chat box again around how this is happening within your own organisation. So for us, it's really important that we think about how these kinds of things have emerged as a result of the pandemic, but how we can start to embed it. So this is not just about an emergency response, it's about a cultural change that attends to the psychological safety of our teams. So I've put some questions up there for you to reflect and comment on. How does your current organisation provide this containment? Do you think it's doing it effectively? If not, why not? And how do you think it could be improved? Now, we noticed that lots of people were commenting in the chat box, but only responding to the panelists. So just make sure you click that little arrow that says you're responding to panelists and attendees so everybody can see your comments. So I'm just going to pause for a couple of moments there and ask people to put their thoughts into the chat box for us to understand and respond to. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing what's working really well in organisations. So lots of examples there of the midwifery advocate role really driving this particular agenda within organisations, and those people setting up the kinds of forums that enable psychologically safe spaces to be created. And other examples, things like wobble rooms, which has been a response to the pandemic. So these are nice environments that people can take time out of the clinical environment and come to just for some space. This is something that I hope will sustain post-pandemic and isn't something that's just seen as a crisis intervention, because I know it's something that people have really, really valued. A couple of comments here around the things that have not been so helpful, and one of them was around this idea of being very reactive. So when staff perhaps present us with those feelings of being overwhelmed, and the situation feeling to them unmanageable, that sometimes we can then go into that kind of reactive mode, which can emphasize to them that actually that this is unmanageable and we need to move into sort of crisis response. And actually the process that we've just described can be very empowering, because the person starts to break down some of those overwhelming situations and to see that there are strategies they have within them to be able to respond to those things. So just really bearing in mind that kind of sense of not jumping in and saving the person, but thinking, how can I work with this person to identify potential strategies? I'm just going to flip down on some of the others. Schwartz rounds is another one that's another environment where open reflection. And one of the great things about Schwartz rounds is that a person brings a particular challenge that's based on their personal experience, but with quite a big audience, a big group of people, we can have a reflective discussion about how the key themes might relate to our own practice. And the great thing about that is it really reduces that feeling of isolation. Our contexts might be different and our roles within the organisation may be, but as people working within this arena, we're having similar kinds of experiences and responses, and we have things to offer each other. One of the things that's seen as a huge barrier to psychological safety is really around time to prioritise this. And for me, in my research, that's been the key factor in organisations that were able to create a culture of psychological safety compared to those that didn't. And that was about the time that was allocated to people to access these different agendas and different forums. What we found was that those staff that have most control over their diaries, so usually more senior staff, were able to access these forums, but those who were delivering frontline care were less likely to, because of the demands on their clinical contribution and the difficulty with being released from clinical work to be able to attend. So one of the things that we identified was, and this is where you guys come in at your level within the organisation, is that these kinds of strategies on their own are not effective unless there is that wider organisational commitment to enabling these things to happen. So the practicalities around how we release those frontline staff to be able to attend these kinds of situations are just as important as the type of intervention that we choose. And the reason why we say this is because if we can see across the organisation, there's lots of different opportunities for people to engage these things, but we know we'll never be able to go to those things because we'll never be released from our clinical duties to do that. That can even reinforce that negative feeling about how the organisation is valuing us and the contribution that we make. So it's important to think about the layers of implementation. It's not just about the strategy, it's all about how we enable people to be released from their clinical duties to be able to attend. Okay, well, that's so helpful, and I'll keep an eye on that chat so that we can pick up on some of those aspects in the Q&A as well. Now, in our current time, we've got to acknowledge that we'll see signs amongst our teams of emotional distress, and you know that's inevitable. As we said before, this is about normalizing these kinds of reactions and responses. But just to help you understand a little bit about what might be going on for that individual, I've used an analogy that's often used in the mental health first aid literature. And there was a question actually that in the Q&A, and this may help to answer that question. But we use this analogy of a stress bucket. And the reason why this helps us is because it enables us to think about the unique responses. Why do some people seem to be able to cope with huge amounts of extra stresses within the workplace, and others don't? There's a variation in the response that we see. And I hope nobody gets offended, but what I'm going to say is that's because we're all buckets. So you're a bucket and I'm a bucket. And if we think about ourselves as different sized buckets, we've all got different levels of capacity. And that's all about how we internalize our own perception of stress and our perception of our ability to cope with the stress. So it's all about that kind of appraisal situation. This is something that when I perceive it in a different way to every single 65 of you that are out there. That's based upon my early experiences. It's based upon role models that have influenced me. All of these things will contribute to the capacity of my bucket, of me as a bucket. Now, in our current situation, what we know is that there are additional stresses. So the things that fill our bucket up, like finance issues, maybe a particular life change that we're experiencing, relationship issues, money troubles, those kinds of things, assignments, these types of things that fill our bucket up on a day-to-day basis. Well, that's okay, that's normal. A degree of stress is, as Amy said, it's inevitable, and we want it because it arouses us, it makes us take action. But what we usually have is lots of coping strategies to be able to keep a balance. So our bucket might be getting filled up, but it's a leaky bucket. There's a balance there. So maybe we socialize with people, so we talk things out loud. Maybe we do a hobby. Maybe it's about going to the gym or playing a sport. Those kinds of things. We have strategies to manage these things, and ultimately that enables us to have a balance there. So as things stresses and fill our bucket, things also help us to alleviate that. But what we've got to notice at the moment is there are additional stresses. There are things that we are dealing with that we have never ever comprehended before. The whole way in which we work, and particularly the services that you are leading, have had to transform in a short period of time. And we've had to make choices and decisions that we would not choose to do in normal circumstances. So we have not only the practical implications of that, but the moral and values-based implications, which are all additional stresses. And coupled with that, the things that we would normally do to balance that out, such as going on holiday, seeing friends, that's all been limited by the impact of the pandemic. So we've had to find other coping strategies, or we've struggled to find other coping strategies that are effective. And maybe we're using coping strategies that are actually adding to our stresses. So maybe we've seen people start to eat more unhealthily, smoking's increase, alcohol use has increased. And whilst that may alleviate in the short term, actually, it does contribute to additional stresses. So the really helpful thing about the stress bucket is when we can identify stresses, we can start to take away the ones that we can do something about. When we know what our coping strategies are, we can think about how can I reinstigate some of those, or how can I alter them so that I can still access them. So as Amy said, often the things we know help us are the things that we stop doing most quickly because we've not got the energy, but how can we bring those things back in play? But also, how can we spot that period at the top of the bucket where we're close to overflowing? What are the signs that we can notice in ourselves, but also share with our teams, that would say, actually, I'm getting to a stage now where I do need some extra help, or I need somebody to take away some of this pressure because I'm in danger of of my bucket overflowing, of really struggling to such an extent that it may cause a more significant mental health problem moving forward. So this is what we might call our early warning signs in the world of mental health. And they're the things that we encourage the person to identify, but also family members, those around, to say, okay, when this person stops sleeping so well, or if we start to see that person not eating so much, these are the kinds of things that tell us that bucket is starting to fill. And this is just a list of those kinds of early signs that emotional distress is appearing. And you might notice these things in yourself in response to situations, or you might be starting to notice it in those that you work closely with, or people are reporting that these things are common amongst their teams. Now, as the British Psychological Society says, and all of the research that's coming out around how we respond to the emotional needs of healthcare staff, the most valuable support is support from leaders and support from peers. And it is nothing more than that emotional containment. It's about validating that response, normalizing it, and empathizing with it. And for the vast majority of people, that will be absolutely all that's required. And we've got to be really careful of not medicalizing these responses and saying this is something more significant. Actually, this is totally normal because the situation we find ourselves in is significant. And if we didn't have an emotional response to this, then we wouldn't be human. It's completely normal human response. But where we do see that this is starting to become more problematic, what our role can be is in helping people to access that extra support. So we're not there to provide it by any means, but we can facilitate that person being able to break down some of that stigma that they may have around accessing support services, or holding a mirror up to them and saying, you know, as somebody who you trust and somebody who knows you well, I can see that these things are starting to get slightly out of control. And there are, as you know, lots and lots of local options, but also on a national level, my NHS people have invested a huge amount in additional support if this is the case. So I'm going to move on now to a method that you might want to utilise when working with some of your senior leaders so that they can cascade this out to their teams, of how you might provide psychologically safe spaces. Now, this is not to say this should replace any of the fabulous interventions and structures that have been set up, or the professional midwifery advocacy role, but this is about thinking, how can we make this something that's routine and available? It doesn't need a specially trained person to provide this. This is something that we can all be doing. So co-consulting is a method of peer group coaching. And what we've done as part of this leadership programme is to enable you to have, following today's session, an action learning set. And they will use this method of co-consulting in that action learning set. So if you haven't booked onto that yet, then please do. It's all on the flyer. The link's there on the flyer for you to be able to book your space. And actually there's enough capacity for 120 people. So I would encourage you, if you've got one booked, book a second one, because there's enough space there for you to attend 2 of these sessions, and they're scheduled throughout March, the rest of March and April. So co-consulting is a method that enables you to work in a group to peer group coach each other. So the facilitator isn't there as the coach, but they are there to enable you to work through a process, which will mean you will act as both a peer, a client, you'll receive the coaching, but also you'll be in a position to coach others as well. So this is a way of cascading out this coaching culture into the conversations that you have. So as Amy said, when it comes to coaching, the emphasis is all around the participants developing their own solutions and ways forward. So we certainly don't take on that mantra of the expert or the person that holds the answers to all the problems. But what we are expert in is facilitating a process. We must make sure that each session does begin with a group agreement. So we really do set the kind of expectation of what this session is. So this is a common phrase that you might see. So ask people to think about either the conditions or behaviours that they've noticed in a group where they felt safe to bring their whole authentic self to the session. Now, when I read that back, it feels very mental health nursey. So I would encourage you to put this into your own language. But what I basically ask people to do is to think about where groups have worked well, where people have felt able to be honest, open, authentic, and what have they noticed about what that group has offered them, what have been the conditions, what behaviours have they noticed. And I would really encourage you to go beyond those kind of standard phrases of confidentiality, respect, those types of things. We could all say those things. What do those mean, and what behaviours will show people that that's what's being offered to them. So we start each session in that way. And then we move into a process, and you'll see from the materials we'll send out to you after today's session that the process of co-consulting is very structured. Now, as a mental health nurse, I struggle sometimes with keeping to timings and structure because, you know, my whole aim is to get people talking and free flowing. But actually, within this particular approach, the structure and the timing offers a clarity which enables this to feel like a very boundaried and safe space. So it starts off with one person in the group identifying a problem statement, and they share that problem statement just for a couple of minutes. We don't encourage big storytelling. We don't need to know what the person ate for their dinner before that happened, or who's related to who, or any of those things. So we try and keep the person to be very focused on what is the problem that they would appreciate some time to reflect upon within this group. There's usually about 6 people in the group plus the facilitator. We then identify 2 people to act as the coach, and they take on different roles, and they're aided by the facilitator. So one of the coaches will start off by asking what we call clarifying questions. So these are the questions that are about fact finding. They can often be closed questions. It's about making sure you've got the right understanding of the situation, that you've not made any assumptions, or you're not missing some key information that you need. So we go through that process of just clarifying, okay, I need to know this bit of information to be able to support you with this situation. We then ask the next coach to do what we call exploratory questions. And this is where we spend the most amount of time in this particular cycle. And the exploratory questions are really about digging a little bit deeper. So we understand the problem now, but what are the constructs that are underpinning it? What are the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions, the political, the contextual stuff that's really underpinning this situation? How can we help that person to unpick it so it doesn't feel like a problem that they're stuck with or something that they're overwhelmed with? And this is about asking those exploratory open questions, the ones that don't enable people to say yes or no. It's about the hows, and it's the whens, and those kinds of opening sentences. We then ask the person to do something that's a bit odd. In this scenario, we ask them the client to turn their camera off, and the whole group then, the group of 6, have a whole discussion about what they've heard. Now, it feels really strange to do this, but it's an incredibly powerful tool. The person gets to just listen, and they don't have to respond. They get to kind of step back and hear what their situation looks like and sounds like from other people's perspectives, which is a totally unique opportunity. And the people having the reflective discussion are not seeing the cues of that person, so they're not seeing the nods. They're not addressing their comments to that person. They're able to be quite free in their responses. We then invite the person back, and they reflect on what they've heard, and they start to make some action plans if there are things that they want to do differently as a result. Now, my experience of facilitating co-consulting is that moment where they sit back and listen to what they heard can be transformatory to people. They can be those real light bulb moments of course, that's what's happening here, or why didn't I think about it in that way? And also, when we talked about the process of validating, empathizing, normalizing, that process really helps that to happen. So in your groups, in your action learning sets, you'll get the opportunities to be both the client and also the coach. Within your 3-hour session, we'll usually do about 3 rounds of this. So 3 clients, 3 opportunities to be clients, 3 opportunities to be coached. So lots of opportunity there to practice this. And there is a framework that underpins this and makes it differentiates it to a normal conversation that you maybe have with a friend or family. And this is all based on research around group dynamics. And the authors of this particular model, again, we'll share this article with you. They say that this is an oversimplification of this, that those that are psychodynamic psychoanalysts will absolutely unpin all of the different complex relational dynamics that are going on here. But actually, when we're thinking about this particular situation and scenario in the context of psychological safety, this method, this BART method, the boundaries, the authority, the role and the task is really, really helpful to keep mindful of. So just very briefly, as I say, we'll share this paper with you. The boundary is what provides the container. That's about being very clear about the purpose of this particular session. That's where that group agreement comes into. We really understand why we're here and what our expectations are of each other. We also make sure we adhere to that. So the facilitator's role is to make sure that we stay on track. And where there's a tendency to go off on different tangents or for the group to start, the territory of the group to start to spread more widely, that the facilitator holds that and brings it back on task. The timings are really important. So we know that if we're having an informal conversation with a friend or family member, we turn take. Some people talk more than others. We maybe start to talk for 2-3 hours. Well, in this situation, we're very boundaried around the time that we attribute to each of those phases. And again, that helps the person to know exactly what they're expecting, what their contribution should be, and contributes to that psychological safety. The A stands for authority, and authority can be something that's formal. It's as a result of the job title that you've got as a dom or a hom. You have authority that is attributed to you because of that role, and we have to take consideration of that within the groups. Who the people are and the roles that they have is significant. There may also be some delegated authority, and that delegated authority in this context comes from the idea of, are you here as the client? Are you here as the coach? It's the different roles that we're taking up. But also there's some personal authority there, and that's about how you as an individual respond to either that formal or delegated authority that you have. And the facilitator will be really carefully watching this to make sure that you have opportunity to take up that authority of that role, and people that are perhaps more dominant than the group don't overshadow that opportunity to do that. The next one is about the role. You have very much linked to the authority. Again, it's about the clarity of the role. Who have we got in the room here? What job roles or job descriptions are relevant, but also that informal. So you as a person are a head of midwifery or a director of midwifery, but how you interact within a group is individual to you. And that will be based upon your personality type, how extroverted you are, how introverted you are, how you prefer to reflect. And it's really important to take that into consideration. And the final one is the task. And this is again about clarity and mutual understanding. Does everybody know why we're here? Have we defined this properly for everyone? So just as on a practical basis now, you've all had opportunity, I hope, to book onto your action learning set. If not, you book your session through Eventbrite, you'll receive an invitation to the session, and it's just a Zoom link. Nothing more complicated than that. So you click on the Zoom link, you will appear with up to 6 other people and a facilitator. But before your session, we've recorded an example of a co-consulting round for you to watch, and there's a link here to do that. We'll send this in the email out to you. And we also ask you to have a read at that BART model so you've got more clarity around the theory that underpins this approach. Just to flag, in case you haven't already gathered, there's another webinar to follow up from today on the 4th of May. And that's on this topic of managing upwards. So I'm going to stop my share now, and I'm going to ask Amy to join me, and we'll take any questions that you've got or comments around what you've heard around the psychological safety.
Thanks, Gemma. That was really good. I'm trying not to think of myself too much as a bucket.
Sorry, I don't want to offend.
We've got some, I have to say, I've been reading through some of the comments in chat about what organisations have in place. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. Can I just say, I don't know whether this, I suppose it's given me a second to think about. Maybe there's been some, which always does, some amazing stuff that's come out of this crisis.
Yeah.
Because I wonder whether there's stuff that the organisations would have done or thought about before, possibly with some, possibly not with others, but some incredible things about how staff are able to share and support each other. And these are things that are good to have in place anyway, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think one of the great things about the implications of the pandemic has been the recognition that staff wellbeing is as central to our responses as any of the policies around infection prevention control or any of the kind of operational issues that have needed to be addressed, that this is actually right there at the heart of it. And now we're hearing lots of talk around this recovery phase. How do we acknowledge what people have been through, that in a way that will enable them to move positively forward as a result of this? And what I've heard from our Nightingale Frontline sessions is very much about, for some, they've discovered something in themselves that they didn't know was there before. You know, there's been a sense of resilience, that they've perhaps been put into new, more responsible roles, and they've really thrived in that environment, and they don't want to lose that. The flip side of that is we're hearing people say that they're exhausted, they feel disenfranchised from their organisation, they're seriously considering whether they want to continue working within the environment. So this is a real pivotal time where if we get this right, retention of our workforce is going to be hugely impacted.
Definitely. I've been looking at the chat. I don't think there's specific questions. I guess it's just about reflecting what you said. Have we sent out how people can book onto the co-consulting sessions?
Yes. So on a practice, sorry, that's my emails that have just decided to go bing bong. So on a practical level, the flyer that was sent out to everyone has 2 links on there, and one's for the webinars, one's for the co-consulting session. So as I said before, because there's capacity there for up to 120 people. So because we haven't had that full capacity on the call today, then we can start to, people can book onto 2 sessions. So I'd really encourage them to do that and make the use of the service that's available to them.
Fabulous. Okay. I'm just reading.
I spotted a question around a colleague that's overwhelmed, and this particular person has been helping that individual to prioritise and delegate, but they've had some backlash and criticism from other team members, so not to her face but behind her back, saying that she's now starting to bounce things back. And the thing that made me think here, and this question was about that bucket, and I wonder if it's helpful for that analogy to be spread more widely, and to offer that understanding that everyone's bucket has a different capacity, and also we're not always aware of the stresses that are affecting people, not just at work but also in their personal life. There's not 2 separate buckets, there's only one. So we've got to take into consideration both of those elements. So my strategy and suggestion is about helping those team members to also show that sense of empathy to the individual and look behind that behaviour. It's back to that sense of self-care as being selfish, isn't it? And we need to really start to challenge that, because when people can offer that empathy to each other, they'll see that person be able to respond positively and and then be able to pick that work back up again.
Yes, definitely. And I think there's we were working with an organisation. It was an organisation that didn't do feedback. So we were encouraging the organisation to develop more of a culture of feedback. And what that meant was, while we were doing that, some people were more skilled in it than others. So therefore it landed better sometimes and not so great other times, if this is making sense. So the organisational readiness wasn't there completely. That's why I bring it in around readiness. I think if an individual is trying to make changes to their working arrangement in order to be more effective, that is absolutely right and proper. I wonder whether there's something about bringing people in on that journey. So like you say, talking about their intent, talking about why they're doing something. If people understand what's behind a change in behaviour, then they'll be more accepting of it. That's not to say that sometimes people will respond in a way which is, oh, this is new, I'm not sure I'm used to this, I'm not sure this is great. That's part of the change process. But sometimes the organisational readiness and the readiness of people around you is your responsibility as well. So very much in terms of what you're saying, Gemma, it's about working with others around this strategy as well, would be my advice.
And I that organisational readiness, I think, is so important when we see lots of these amazing interventions and forums that have been created in response to the pandemic. And what could happen is that staff can say, oh, those things have been ticked off, they're available. But actually, unless we've done that work around organisational readiness, either they won't feel able to access them because they maybe see that it's stigmatising, or they may feel that those services are for those that are struggling with their mental health and not for them.
Definitely.
Or they could feel, actually, nobody's thought through how you, as a point of care practitioner, somebody that's counted in the numbers, how am I going to access those things? And as I said before, that can actually be even more demoralising and really undermine those efforts. So as leaders, we can sometimes the shared decision-making councils are a great way to do this. So we think of this great initiative that will really impact on what we think the emotional well-being, and show our staff that we're attending to those things. But how is that landing with those that are delivering, are really at that point of care?
We've got a question about what evidence is there around the need for processing time, which has mostly disappeared with virtual back-to-back meetings.
Yeah, really, really good question. And I guess this takes us back to all of that containment process, really, and all of that literature you offered, Amy, around our stress response and our anxiety response. So what the evidence, a lot of the evidence that I draw on is from the evolutionary psychology basis. So our brains are designed to keep us safe. And when we're in a situation where we're in a high stress, high anxiety situation, we go into like tunnel vision, and we focus on the task at hand, and we see it in a very black and white way. We can't really look beyond anything else other than that. And it's really just about often responding to that particular emergency, not really thinking about the consequences of it. And our brains are made to do that, but they were made to do that because at a time when we evolved, we were dealing with real danger. There were times where our lives were a bit like the zebra. We could actually have come into that kind of threat to life. And the evolutionary psychology theory says that now what we've got is what they call a tricky brain. We've got this primitive brain that's all focused on responding to the emergency, but we've also developed this ability to reflect, to think, to ruminate, and to imagine ourselves in scenarios as well, which can also initiate that anxiety response. Even if it's not right there in front of us, we can imagine ourselves in that scenario. So all of that theory really emphasizes the importance of time to think and space to be able to not be in that tunnel vision, black and white, move from one thing onto the next, but really to access what they call your affiliative system, the place where you feel most calmed, soothed. And that's where your creativity comes from. That's where you start to be able to see the kind of the alternatives, the ways around situations that at that moment in time just feel like a huge stressor. So my advice is to work out ways of doing that really frequently throughout your day. My strategy is I have a hot drink more or less all the time. So I'll do a bit of a grounding exercise. So I'll come out of a situation where kind of heart's going, or probably something like today, and just sit for a few moments, hold the cup, feel it warm there, really center myself, and kind of connect back with my body again, have that moment of mindfulness, and then I can access some genuine reflective thought rather than just moving on to the next task.
Yeah, lovely. I think that's great. I think the only thing I would add to it is look at your day, plan. So look at your day and think about, what's my role in these meetings? What's the end? What am I looking for in these meetings? I was thinking, so I had a bit of processing time while you were talking, Gemma, and I was thinking about the importance of, I am valuable. I am a senior leader. Every bit of my time is really valuable. If the organisation was paying you for every bit of your time, you might think differently about it. I know I do as an external consultant. It's what value am I adding today and why? And if we plan and prepare that, then sometimes our contribution is better. And we might think, in order for me to achieve that by, I don't know, chairing that meeting or steering that meeting or whatever, I need some time off in between. So there is something about being very purposeful about your day and about your week, even in a crisis, which again takes all the things that you've already talked about to do, to centre ourselves, to be calm, to be considered, and to be planned. Because again, getting onto that wheel of, it's very, what do you call it? It's when you see people in it, you can adopt it, can't you? You can adopt that sense of sort of slightly spiraling out of control. So it's about just being very purposeful, I think, as well.
Yeah. And that point you made earlier, Amy, about how our emotions will influence our behaviours. So if we're running from one thing to another, that will impact upon how we're able to perform in that situation. If our stress levels are high, can we really listen to the person that's in front of us, or really engage with this, because perhaps our mind is busy and distracted elsewhere? So all of those things will contribute to how effective we are.
Definitely. And there's some research on self as instrument. So we're all so there is nothing else other than ourselves, if we think about it like that, and how we act and the instrument that we are within an organisation. And if we have that mindset, again, that can be daunting, but it can be really revealing around, if it is just me, how do I work? How do I make sure that I sharpen myself as much as possible? It's kind of liberating, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And perhaps when you're thinking in that way, something a bit more sophisticated than a bucket might be helpful analogy.
I can very often feel like a bucket. I'm sure we all can. I think it's just been lovely. I think we're near the end now, aren't we, in terms of, it's nearly 12:30. But there's some lovely things on chat about some shared good practice in organisation. I think that's the bit that's been really reassuring. And my sense is from people that they've found this helpful to just think about, just take a moment, think about their own self-care, and again, know what helps out there from the foundation, which is brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, this is the start of a relationship with you as heads of midwifery, directors of midwifery. We've called this a leadership boost. It's a short kind of intensive insight into what we do. As Amy said, normally we work in much smaller groups and are able to offer that more personalised development opportunity. So we do really encourage you to keep your eye out on what's available through the foundation. This year we've had more applications from our scholarships and from midwives than ever before, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's testament to Jess's agenda around developing leaders throughout the whole of the hierarchy. But we would really encourage those of you that feel that this is not necessarily about needing to learn leadership theory. You are already leaders. You've been selected for these positions because of that capability that you've got. But how can you develop personally to be the most effective and unique leader? How can you be the leader that you want to be? And that's what we can do and help people to do at the foundation.
Lovely, thank you. Are you closing today's webinar, Gemma?
I can, yeah, absolutely. So we've come to the end of the session, and there's a couple of things, as we've said before, for you to do in preparation for your action learning set, and we want you to make the most of that situation. So our absolute dream is that people go to their action learning set and they feel that they're able to make the most out of the opportunity to such an extent that the group of 6 or whoever many that attend are able to carry on meeting as an action learning set. So our dream would be that these initial groups of 6 are set up by F&F, but then you have that opportunity to continue to carry on that support network. Because as senior leaders in organisations, it can be so isolating. We've got the opportunity here to do something quite special and set that network up. So when you attend, I would encourage you, if you feel it's appropriate, to say, you know, how can we continue this? What mechanism shall we use so that we can keep these conversations going, and practice what we're preaching? You know, we create those psychologically safe spaces for ourselves. So thank you so much, everybody, for your questions, your comments. Even though it feels like a very one-way kind of delivery, we felt very much that you've been with us all the way. We set off asking you what we hoped what you wanted to achieve, and for many of you it was a bit of time out to think and reflect, and we hope that we've offered you that time. Any feedback that you have for us will be so welcomed, and you will receive some evaluation questionnaires at the end of the programme to be able to offer that to us. We really would value your perspectives on this, so we can feed it into future opportunities for you. But enjoy the rest of your day, and I may well see you on one of those action learning sets as a facilitator as well. And thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adam and the Academy Office, for hosting and helping. And have good days, everybody.